Every morning, Vanessa Holloway walked into Holloway Capital like she owned the world. Because she did. 30 years old, razor sharp, untouchable. But while the board studied her balance sheets and her rivals studied her weaknesses, nobody thought to look at the quiet man pushing a mop past her office door at midnight. Nobody saw the way his hand would pause near the door frame, just for a second, like a man making sure something precious was still breathing. Nobody knew he was her husband. And nobody knew that the life she was so desperate to protect was already in someone else's crosshairs. The story already has you. Hit that like button, drop your city in the comments, and follow along to the very end. Let's see how far this story travels. The elevator doors opened at 6:47 a.m., and Vanessa Holloway stepped onto the 42nd floor like she had somewhere more important to be than wherever she was standing. She always arrived before anyone else. Not because she was trying to make a point. She genuinely didn't care about optics at that hour. She arrived early because it was the only time the building was quiet enough for her to think, and thinking was the one thing she did better than everyone around her. Her heels made a clean, precise sound against the polished marble floors. The overnight cleaning crew was just finishing up. Two men working their way down the far corridor with mops and supply carts, their movements slow and methodical, barely acknowledging her. She barely acknowledged them. That was just how it worked. Except one of those men, the taller one, with his cap pulled low and his shoulders drawn in the way a big man does when he's deliberately trying to shrink himself. That one glanced up. Just for a second. Less than a second. And Vanessa looked away first, the way she always did, because that was part of the arrangement. That was what they had agreed to. That was the cost of everything they were trying to protect. She set her coffee on her desk, opened her laptop, and pulled up the merger files she'd been living inside for the past 3 months. $12 billion. The Arcturus deal. The kind of acquisition that didn't just grow a company, it reshaped an entire industry. Her industry. The numbers were clean, the legal team was ready, and the board presentation was in 8 days. 8 days. She just needed to hold it together for 8 more days. Her phone buzzed against the desk. A text from an unsaved number, which meant it was from him. Noticed unfamiliar vehicle in parking structure. Level B2. Silver sedan, no plates. Been there since yesterday. She read it twice, then set the phone face down. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself Logan noticed things like that because he was built that way. Wired to track patterns and flag anomalies the way other people tracked weather or traffic. She told herself that 8 years out of the military, and he still hadn't learned how to turn it off. She told herself a lot of things those days. What she didn't do was reply. Vanessa. Vanessa Holloway had not started with money. She'd started with a scholarship, a dorm room, and a chip on her shoulder so large it had its own gravitational pull. She'd grown up in a small, forgettable suburb outside of Columbus, the daughter of a high school shop teacher and a woman who worked 2 jobs and still came home to make dinner. Not poor exactly, but close enough to poor that she understood the distance between having enough and having options. She had been relentless from the age of 14. By 22, she'd finished her MBA. By 25, she had made partner at a boutique investment firm. By 27, she had walked away from that firm, raised her own seed capital from connections she'd spent years building, and launched Holloway Capital with 4 employees and a sublease on a small office in Midtown. 3 years later, it had 42 floors, 400 employees, and a board that was simultaneously impressed by and slightly afraid of the woman who ran it. She was not the first woman to lead a major investment firm, but she was one of the youngest, and she operated in a world that still, quietly, politely, with expensive coffee in hand, believed that youth and gender were liabilities. So she had learned to walk into every room without a single visible crack. She had learned to wear composure the way other people wore armor. She had learned, maybe too well, to separate the person she was at home from the person she was at work. The problem was that home and work now shared a building. Logan Pierce had arrived at Holloway Capital 9 months ago through a staffing agency. Standard background check, standard credentials. He listed his employment history as facilities maintenance at a private logistics company in Virginia, which was technically true in the way that most cover stories are technically true. Built on a skeleton of real facts, fleshed out with carefully chosen omissions. What the background check didn't show, because it had been scrubbed the way only certain federal agencies know how to scrub, was that Logan Pierce had spent 12 years as a Navy SEAL, 3 combat deployments, classified operations in places that don't appear on publicly available mission records, commendations that existed in files kept behind clearances he no longer held. No, he had left the teams 8 years ago, not because he was broken, though he had been, in some ways, but because he had a daughter who needed a father more than the country needed another operator. Lily was 7 now, small for her age, with her mother's dark eyes and Logan's tendency to go quiet when she was working through something difficult. Her mother, Logan's first wife, Carla, had died of a brain aneurysm when Lily was 14 months old. She had gone to sleep on a Tuesday night and hadn't woken up, and Logan had found her in the morning, and that had been the end of one version of his life. He had raised Lily alone in a small house in New Jersey for 2 years before meeting Vanessa at a fundraiser he'd only attended because his neighbor had begged him to come, and he hadn't had a good enough reason to say no. He and Vanessa had spoken for 4 hours at that fundraiser. Just talked. About Lily. About Carla. About what it meant to build something from nothing. About the kind of loneliness that comes not from being isolated, but from being surrounded by people who don't actually see you. He had told her things he hadn't told anyone since Carla. She had told him things she hadn't said out loud to herself. They had been married 11 months later, in a small ceremony with 6 witnesses, in a courtroom in Lower Manhattan. And then the arrangement had begun. It had been Vanessa's idea to keep it quiet. She had explained it carefully, and Logan had understood, even if understanding something and accepting it were not exactly the same thing. The board already watches me like I'm one mistake away from being managed out, she had said. Half of them inherited their seats. The other half have been in this industry since before I was born. If they find out I'm married to a man who works maintenance, they will use it. Not loudly. They'll never say it out loud, but they'll use it. You're embarrassed, Logan had said. Not as an accusation, just putting the word in the room. I'm strategic, she had said, and I'm not embarrassed. I'm protecting something, our life. He had accepted that. He had taken the job at Holloway Capital because he wanted to be close to her, close enough to see if there was ever a reason to be worried. He had never told her that part. She thought he had taken the job because decent facilities work in Manhattan paid reasonably well and offered flexible enough hours to manage Lily's school schedule. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was that Logan Pierce had been watching for 2 years, quietly and carefully, for signs that someone from his past had found them. Because there were people from his past who had reasons to look. At 9:15 that morning, Vanessa's executive assistant, Marcus, appeared in her office doorway with his tablet and a look that meant someone important was already unhappy about something. Damian Cross's office called, Marcus said. He wants a preview of the Arcturus presentation before Thursday's board session. Vanessa looked up from her screen. He can see it Thursday. He said it's a courtesy concern. He wants to make sure the narrative framing is, his word, appropriate for where the board's head is right now. Damian doesn't get a preview. She said it the way people say the sky is blue. What else? Marcus scrolled. The gala is confirmed for Friday. Rooftop, Black Rock Hotel. 700 guests, 40 board members, 30 media. Security is running their final check this afternoon. The new director wants a walkthrough with you at 2. Who's the new director? Victor Hale. Came over from Pierce Meridian Security Group. Damian actually recommended him. Something small moved behind Vanessa's eyes, but she kept her expression even. Fine. 2 o'clock. Marcus nodded and left. Vanessa turned back to her screen, but she wasn't reading the numbers anymore. She was thinking about the silver sedan on level B2. She was thinking about the fact that Damian Cross had recommended the new security director. She was thinking about how Logan had mentioned the car at 6:47 in the morning, which meant he had been in the parking structure before sunrise, which meant he hadn't slept. She picked up her phone, typed, "When did you leave the house?" A minute passed. Then, 4 a.m. Lily's at school. Don't worry about the car. Probably nothing. But change your route today. She stared at that last sentence. Change your route today. She set the phone down without responding. Damian Cross had an office on the 38th floor, which was 4 floors below Vanessa's, and a fact he had never entirely made peace with. He was 44, silver-haired, and had the particular quality of handsomeness that photographs well and leaves a room feeling somehow slightly manipulated. He had been at Holloway Capital for 6 years, had served as chief strategy officer for 3, and had, in his own estimation, been the primary architect of at least half the firm's most significant acquisitions. In Vanessa's estimation, Damian Cross was intelligent, ambitious, occasionally useful, and fundamentally untrustworthy in the specific way that people become untrustworthy when they believe they deserve something they haven't been given. She had known for most of the past year that Damian wanted her job. She had known for most of the past 3 months that he was doing something about it. What she didn't know yet was how far he'd gone. At 11:30 that morning, Damian Cross sat in his office across from Victor Hale, the new security director, and reviewed a timeline on a document that existed only in print, never digitally. "The gala is the window," Hale said. He was a compact, flat-faced man with very still eyes. 700 people, 4 exits, full media presence, noise cover. The board will be there, which means attention is split. "The board needs to believe this is external," Damian said. "None of this traces back to this office." "It won't." Hale folded the document. "Our guys are already inside. 3 on the security detail, 2 in catering. The rest handle transport." He paused. "There is one complication. The janitor." Hale didn't smile exactly, but something shifted in his expression. "He's been in the parking structure twice this week. Off the clock. He noticed the vehicle." "He's a janitor," Damian said. "He noticed the vehicle." Damian waved a hand. "Handle it." "We will. But I want you to understand, Tatum. If he keeps moving around the building like he does, there's a chance." "He's a janitor, Victor." Damian stood, buttoning his jacket. "Nobody in this building has ever looked at him twice. Nobody is going to start now." "%." Logan spent most of that Tuesday in the sub-basement, working through a list of routine maintenance tasks that gave him legitimate access to parts of the building most employees never saw. He had long since mapped every mechanical room, every utility corridor, every security camera blind spot on all 42 floors. He had done this quietly, over months, the way he had been trained to learn terrain, not quickly, not obviously, but thoroughly. He had found 3 things in the past 10 days that bothered him. The first was the silver sedan, no plates, parked in a rotating pattern across level B2 and B3. Not always the same spot. That was discipline. Amateur surveillance picked one spot. Professional surveillance rotated. The second was a gap in the building's camera coverage on the northeast stairwell, 3rd floor to 7th. He had reviewed the maintenance logs. The cameras had been functioning correctly until 6 weeks ago. The work order that supposedly documented the repair had been filed, but the cameras hadn't been restored. Someone had signed off on a repair that didn't happen. The third was the new security director, Victor Hale. Logan had run Hale's name through 2 private networks he still had quiet access to, favors owed by people who'd never fully left the world he used to work in. What came back was thin, almost too thin. Pierce Meridian Security Group was real, but Hale's employment records there had the texture of a document assembled in a hurry. There were gaps. There were dates that didn't match other dates. Logan knew what clean gaps looked like. He'd created enough of them himself. He sat in the sub-basement with his lunch and stared at his phone and thought about how to say what he needed to say to Vanessa without saying it in a way that would make her close off. She had been closing off more lately. He understood why. The Arcturus deal had her attention the way a drowning person focuses on the only piece of wood in the water. Everything else becomes peripheral. And he understood, more than she knew, how much this deal meant to her. Not just professionally, to her sense of what the last 10 years had been for. He didn't want to take that from her. But he also knew the difference between paranoia and pattern recognition. And this was pattern recognition. He typed, "I need to talk tonight." Not a text conversation, real conversation. She replied 40 minutes later. "Logan, I have the security walkthrough at 2, board calls from 4 to 7, and the Arcturus legal team is flying in tomorrow morning. Can it wait until Thursday?" He looked at his phone for a long moment. "It can't," he typed, then deleted it. "Sure," he typed instead. "Thursday is fine." He put his phone in his pocket and went back to work. "What the?" The security walkthrough that afternoon lasted 40 minutes. Victor Hale walked Vanessa through the gala setup on the rooftop level, the elevator protocols, the perimeter stations. He was professional, thorough, and said all the right things. He had a way of making eye contact that felt like authority, steady, deliberate, the kind of eye contact that communicates I have this handled without requiring words. Vanessa found him slightly unsettling, though she couldn't have said exactly why. There was a quality to him that she associated with people who were very good at performing competence. The way he answered every question a half-second too smoothly, the way his calm didn't quite reach his body. But she had no specific reason not to trust him, and she had a $12 billion merger to close, and she moved on. What she didn't know was that 3 of the 6 men who had stood around her during that walkthrough would, in 72 hours, be pointing guns at her.
Boss,
Logan came home at 8:30 to find Lily at the kitchen table with her math homework spread across 3 chairs and a look of profound philosophical suffering on her face. "Dad," she said, with the gravity of someone announcing bad news, "fractions are stupid." "Fractions are actually really useful," he said, dropping his bag and crouching down beside her. "How far are you?" "Page 2. "Out of how many?" She turned the worksheet over. 4. He sat down next to her and they worked through it together, Logan walking her through the logic slowly, Lily arguing with each step before reluctantly conceding that it made sense. It was one of his favorite things about her, the arguing. Carla had been the same way. She had never just accepted an explanation. She had needed to understand the why. When the worksheet was done, Lily looked at him with the directness that 7-year-olds deploy without warning or mercy. "Are you worried about something?" she asked. He looked at her. "What makes you ask that?" "You get this thing with your face," she said, "like you're trying not to have a thing with your face." He laughed. He couldn't help it. Genuine laughter, not the managed kind. "I'm okay, Bug, just tired." She studied him for another moment, apparently deciding whether to accept this. Then she picked up her pencil and started erasing something on page 3. "Vanessa didn't come home for dinner again," she said. Not accusatory, just noting. "She's got a lot going on at work right now." "She always has a lot going on at work." Logan didn't say anything to that, because she wasn't wrong. Wednesday moved fast. The Arcturus legal team arrived from Chicago and took over the 41st floor conference room for most of the day. Vanessa shuttled between meetings, calls, and document reviews at a pace that left her no room for anything that wasn't directly related to the deal. Logan spent Wednesday doing something he hadn't told Vanessa he'd done before. He quietly pulled the building's visitor logs from the past 6 weeks and cross-referenced them against the security staffing schedule. It took most of the shift, working from a terminal in the building management office that he had legitimate reason to access. He wasn't hacking anything. He was just reading documents that a maintenance supervisor was technically authorized to read. What he found was this. In the 6 weeks since Victor Hale had started, 14 individual security staff members had been quietly replaced. The churn had been attributed to voluntary departures in the official documentation. 14 people. In 6 weeks. In a department of 30. That was not natural turnover. That was a crew being assembled. Logan sat very still in front of that screen for a long time. Then he took out his phone and called a number he hadn't called in almost 3 years. It rang twice. Then a woman's voice said, "I wondered when this would happen." "Rios," he said, "I need to know if anyone from the Kalani network is still active." A pause. Then, "Where are you, Logan?" "New York." Another pause. Longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. "How long have you been in New York?" 2 years. "Logan." The way she said his name had a weight to it. "Marchetti's organization, the people you rolled up in the 18 mission. There have been credible intelligence reports for the past year that the surviving leadership has been restructuring, running a kidnap and ransom operation, high-value targets, not random, specific." The air in the management office felt different than it had a moment ago. "Specific how?" he asked. "Specific as in personal," she said. "Revenge motivated. They've been looking for someone, Logan. We didn't know where." He said, "They found me." He hung up and sat without moving for 4 minutes. He was not panicking. Panic was something he had trained out of himself a long time ago, burned away through repetition and cold water in situations that were objectively much worse than this one. What he felt instead was a cold, exact, very familiar clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when everything uncertain becomes certain. He called Vanessa. She didn't pick up. He texted, "Call me when you can. It's important." She texted back 3 hours later. "Logan, I'm sorry I'm back-to-back all afternoon. Is everything okay with Lily?" "Lily's fine," he wrote. "Call me tonight." "I'll be home by 10, she said. "I promise." She wasn't home by 10. She was home at 11:40, moving through the front door with her coat still on and her phone in her hand, and Logan was sitting at the kitchen table waiting for her. She stopped when she saw him. Something in the way he was sitting, very still, very straight, hands flat on the table, registered differently than his usual tiredness. "What's wrong?" she said. "Sit down." "Logan, please sit down, Vanessa." She sat. He looked at her, and he told her. Not everything. There were parts of the 18 mission that he still couldn't fully explain without clearances neither of them had. But he told her enough. He told her about Marchetti's network, about the restructured organization, about what Rios had said. He told her about the 14 replaced security staff. He told her about Victor Hale's paperwork that didn't quite line up. He told her not to go to the gala. He watched her face while he talked. He had learned, over 2 years of marriage, to read her, to see the small movements behind the composure she wore like a second skin. And what he saw while he talked was this. She believed him, and she was fighting it. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You called one of your old contacts," she said. "Yes." "Without telling me." "I'm telling you now." "Logan." She pressed her fingertips to her temple. "You've been running some kind of private security operation inside my company for how long?" 9 months, he said. "That's why I took the job." She stood up. He watched her walk to the window, a habit she had when she was processing something difficult, putting physical space between herself and the problem. "The gala is in 2 days, she said. 700 people, 40 board members, 30 media contacts. I cannot cancel it." "I'm not asking you to cancel it. I'm asking you to change your security detail and avoid any situation where you're isolated. Victor Hale is my security director. Victor Hale is possibly working against you." She turned from the window. Her face had the controlled quality it got when she was in a meeting, the careful blankness that was actually the most intense version of her focus. "You don't have proof," she said. "You have patterns. You have suspicions. You have—" She stopped herself. "What?" he said. "A history," she said quietly, "of seeing threats everywhere." He absorbed that. He kept his face even, because getting angry wouldn't help either of them, and because he understood, in some part of himself, he didn't enjoy acknowledging that she wasn't entirely wrong. He had seen threats that didn't materialize. He had run threat assessments that turned out to be false positives. He had, in the first 2 years after leaving the teams, struggled genuinely with the difference between vigilance and paranoia. But this wasn't that. He knew the difference now. He had learned the hard way. "Okay," he said. "I understand, just don't go anywhere alone with the security team. Stay with Marcus. Stay with people you've known for more than 6 weeks." She nodded. Not in agreement exactly, more like she was filing the information away. "I have to be at that gala," she said. $12 billion, Logan. "I know. 8 days. I know." She came back to the table, sat down across from him. And for a moment the CEO disappeared and just Vanessa was there. Tired in a way that went past work, carrying something heavier than a merger. "I know you're trying to protect me," she said. "I do know that. But I can't let fear run my company." She looked at him directly. "That's not a criticism. That's just who you are," he said. "I know." They sat there in the quiet kitchen for a moment that felt both very ordinary and very fragile. "Go to sleep," he said finally. "You've got the legal team at 7. She reached across the table and put her hand on his for just a moment. Then she stood up, collected her things, and walked toward the bedroom. Logan stayed at the table a little longer. He picked up his phone and sent a single text to Rios. "Friday night. Black Rock Hotel. I need eyes." Then he went to check on Lily, who who was sleeping with one arm hanging off the bed and her hair tangled across the pillow, and he stood in the doorway for a long time, watching her breathe. Thursday passed without incident, which Logan knew meant nothing. The absence of visible threat was not the same as safety. He moved through his shift methodically, watching Hale's security team run their gala rehearsal on the rooftop. Noting positions, noting rotations, noting the two men he'd seen together in the parking structure who were now wearing Holloway Capital security uniforms. He photographed what he could, discreetly. Sent it to Rios. She called him back in 20 minutes. The man on the left, his name is Guerra. He worked transport for Marchetti for 6 years. A pause. Logan, this is real. I know it's real. You need to pull her out of that building. She won't go. Then you need to be there Friday, not as the janitor. He had known that. He had known it since Wednesday night, when he had sat at the kitchen table and watched Vanessa's face and understood that she was going to go to that gala no matter what he said. He had made a decision in that moment that he hadn't told anyone. Not Rios, not Vanessa. Friday, he was going to be close. Lily was going to spend Friday night with a family he trusted completely. The Garcias, 3 blocks over, who had watched her dozens of times and who knew, in the vague and comfortable way of good neighbors, that Logan had a complicated job history without knowing any of the specifics. He would drop Lily off by 5. He would be back at the Black Rock Hotel by 6:30. He had a plan. It wasn't a good plan, in the sense that the best plans account for every variable. But it was a real plan, built on real information, and Logan Pierce had operated on worse. Friday morning, Vanessa stood in front of her bathroom mirror at 6 a.m. in her robe, staring at her reflection in the particular way she did when she was preparing to inhabit a version of herself that required effort. She caught her own eyes in the mirror. She looked tired. She had not slept well. She was thinking about what Logan had said. She had been thinking about it since Wednesday night, running it alongside everything else. The merger timeline, the board, the gala seating chart, like a second conversation happening below the main one. She was not dismissing it. She was not naive. She had built her career on the ability to assess risk honestly, without letting ego or discomfort blur the numbers. But she was also standing inside 8 days of the most significant achievement of her professional life. And there was a part of her, a part she was not proud of, but also could not fully suppress, that needed this to be fine, that needed Logan to be, just this once, running a little too hot. She reached up and touched the thin gold chain at her throat, the one she always wore under her clothes, the one that held a ring she only put on her finger when she was home. She thought, he's never been wrong about the important things. She thought 8 days. She put on her makeup. She put on her armor. She went to work. Munched. By 6:30 Friday evening, the Black Rock Hotel rooftop was already full of light and movement and the particular energy of expensive parties where everyone is performing ease. The skyline wrapped around it on 3 sides. New York in late September, cool enough for coats but mild enough that nobody wanted to be inside. Vanessa arrived at 6:50 with Marcus and 2 security staff. She was wearing a deep charcoal dress that was elegant without being ornate, her hair up, her posture perfectly calibrated. She moved through the room the way she always did, making each conversation feel like the only one happening, remembering names, asking the right follow-up questions, tracking everything at once behind an expression of absolute presence. She was, in that environment, extraordinary to watch. She did not see Logan when she arrived, but Logan saw her. He was on the service level, 1 floor below the rooftop, in a maintenance uniform that was entirely legitimate. He had arranged a shift swap 3 days earlier. He was near a stairwell that connected to the hotel's freight access, and he had a clear sightline through a service window to the main party floor. He saw Damian Cross move through the crowd an hour into the event, working the room with the fluency of a man who had spent 20 years at parties like this. He saw Victor Hale positioned near the main elevator bank, speaking quietly into a radio. He saw the 2 men, Guerra and another one he'd identified as Torval, another former Marchetti associate, dressed as security staff, positioned at the south and east exits. He counted. 3 confirmed, probably more. A 700-person party as cover, underground garage below, multiple escape routes. He adjusted his position. At 9:15, Damian Cross approached Vanessa on the west side of the rooftop, where she was speaking with two board members. Logan couldn't hear the conversation, but he watched it. He watched Damien's body language, the performance of collegial warmth that Logan had learned to read as something else entirely. He watched Vanessa respond, composed, guarded, polite. And then he watched Damien say something that made the board members around her laugh, and then turn and look toward the service entrance, and Logan followed his gaze and saw two of Hale's men starting to move in a direction that wasn't any of the posted security positions. Logan moved. He was already down the service stairs and through the freight corridor before he had fully processed what he was doing. His body had made the decision before his mind finished formulating it, the way it always had in situations that move faster than conscious thought. He came through the door onto the rooftop service level just as the announcement over the PA asked guests to please step inside briefly for a board address from CEO Vanessa Holloway. He watched her follow Marcus toward the interior ballroom, flanked by two security staff. He watched Victor Hale fall into step behind her. He reached for his phone to text her. His hands were steady. His mind was very calm and very fast, running the geometry of the room, the exits, the probable route to the underground garage, the number of men he'd identified versus the number he hadn't. He typed, "Don't go to the garage. Go back to the main floor. Now." He watched her from across the room. He watched her feel her phone vibrate in her clutch. He watched her glance down at it briefly and then put it away. She kept walking. Logan exhaled slowly. He thought, of course she didn't. He thought, then I'm going down to the garage. He turned and moved toward the service elevator, pulling the maintenance cap lower over his face, and began calculating what he was going to need and what he was going to have to work with, and how much time he had left before the rooftop lights and the party noise above him became irrelevant to anything that mattered. He did not feel fear. He had stopped feeling fear in situations like this a long time ago. What he felt was a familiar, terrible, focused kind of love, the kind that moves through a body like electricity, that makes everything else stop, that has only one direction and only one purpose and no exit condition. He felt it, and he moved toward the elevator, and he went down. The service elevator moved slowly, the way freight elevators always do, grinding and indifferent to urgency. Logan stood inside it with his hands at his sides and his cap pulled low, and his mind running through the garage layout from memory. He had walked level B1 and B2 enough times to know every column, every drain, every camera position, every corner where light failed. He had 14 seconds before the doors opened. He used them. 3 confirmed hostile personnel at the gala. Hale at the elevator bank, Guerra and Torval on the south and east exits. That was the visible layer. Professional operations, real ones, not the improvised kind, always had a deeper layer that didn't show until it was time. Transport team in the garage, probably 4 to 6, depending on budget and how much Marchetti's rebuilt network trusted its own logistics. At least 1 vehicle, possibly 2. The doors opened onto B1. The garage was not dark yet. That would come later. That was always the move. Cut power to a contained space and own the confusion. Right now the fluorescents were still running, casting everything in that specific flat white that made shadows look wrong. Logan stepped out and moved left, staying close to the wall, using the structural columns the way he had used terrain in every environment he'd ever worked in. He had no weapon. That was the central problem. The maintenance uniform had no good options for concealment, and he hadn't wanted to bring anything into the hotel that would require explanation if security swept him. He had a folding knife in his right boot, a habit so old he'd stopped thinking of it as a decision, and the environment, and whatever he could improvise. He had worked with less. He moved to the far column on B2's east side and stopped there, listening. The garage had the low ambient hum of ventilation systems and the distant muffled sound of the city above. But underneath that, if you knew how to listen, there was something else. The specific quality of space that has people in it who are trying to be quiet. He counted. Breathing patterns, a shoe scuff at 11 o'clock, the faint creak of a vehicle suspension adjusting to weight shifting inside it. 1 vehicle, black SUV, parked near the northeast exit ramp. 2 people inside. He kept moving, staying low behind the row of parked cars. His phone was in his pocket. He thought about texting Vanessa again, and then thought about the way she had put the phone away without reading it, and then thought about what that meant for what came next. He had spent 2 years hoping she would trust his read on things when it mattered. He had learned, slowly and sometimes painfully, that hope was not a tactic. He needed to get between her and the exit before Hale's team did. He recalculated. If she followed the standard post-event protocol, which Marcus would run on autopilot, because Marcus was efficient and creatures of habit, she would take the executive elevator to B2 and exit through the northeast ramp to the waiting car. The same route she used every Friday. The same route Logan had asked her, twice in the past week, to change. He was now positioned between the northeast ramp and the main elevator bank, crouched behind a concrete pillar, watching the black SUV 30 meters away. 2 in the vehicle. He needed to know if there were others on foot. He waited. Patience was one of the things the teams had given him that he genuinely didn't mind keeping. The ability to hold completely still and let the environment tell him what it knew. 40 seconds later, a man emerged from the stairwell door on the building's south wall. Logan recognized him from the rooftop. One of Hale's team, a heavy-set man in a Holloway Capital security jacket who had been posted near the catering entrance. He walked to the SUV and exchanged a few words through the window, then took a position near the elevator doors. 1 on foot, 2 in the vehicle, 3 confirmed in the garage. Logan shifted his weight and thought about the knife in his boot and thought about how the next 10 minutes were going to go. The elevator indicator above the main bank lit up. B2. Logan moved. Vanessa stepped into the elevator at the rooftop level with Marcus at her left and 2 security staff, men she'd worked with for months, men she recognized, flanking her. Victor Hale stepped in last, positioning himself near the panel, and pressed B2 without asking her where she wanted to go. She noticed that. She noticed it in the specific way that something small registers differently when your mind has been primed to look. She thought about Logan's text. She thought, "Don't go to the garage. Go back to the main floor. Now." She had put the phone away. She had made a choice. She had made it the way she made most choices, quickly, based on available information, accepting that she might be wrong. She was used to being wrong occasionally and correcting course. That was how decisions worked. But standing in this elevator, watching the floor numbers descend, with Victor Hale standing 3 feet away and his face utterly composed and his eyes on nothing in particular, she felt something she didn't usually feel in professional situations. She felt the back of her neck go cold. "Marcus," she said. Marcus looked at her. He was good at reading her. 6 years of working together had given him a kind of fluency in her nonverbal signals. She saw him register something in her face. "I forgot to... There's a document I need from the 41st floor before we leave," she said. "Can we..." "Miss Holloway." Hale's voice was pleasant and exact. "The car is already waiting. We're running on schedule." "The document can wait," Marcus said, reflexively, because he thought he was being helpful. She looked at Hale. He was looking back at her now, and there was something behind his professional calm that she hadn't seen before, or hadn't let herself see. A quality of patience that wasn't quite patience, more like restraint. The kind a person exercises when they are waiting for a situation to fully resolve in their favor. "I have no proof," she thought. "Logan has no proof." The elevator reached B2. The doors opened. The garage lights went out. It happened in less than 4 seconds, which was how long it took for the controlled dark to do its work. Not total darkness, because the emergency strips along the floor still ran, casting everything in dim red, but enough to shift the geometry of the space, enough to make everything uncertain. Vanessa felt Marcus grab her arm in the dark, reflexively protective, and then felt his grip go wrong, too tight, pulling the wrong direction, and then heard him make a short, surprised sound and felt his hand fall away. She said, "Marcus." A voice said, "Don't." Not Hale's voice. Someone in front of her. Someone who had been waiting. She couldn't see his face, just his shape in the red half-light, large and still. There were others around her now, materializing from positions that had been chosen before she stepped off the elevator. She counted the sounds of movement, 4, maybe 5, and understood with sudden, absolute clarity that this was not improvised. Hale stepped up beside her. His voice was exactly the same as it had been in the elevator, pleasant, professional. "Miss Holloway, please don't make this complicated." "Who are you working for?" she said. She was proud, in a distant way, of how level her voice came out. Her heart was doing something violent inside her chest, but her voice came out level. That's not a conversation for here. Marcus, your assistant is fine. He'll have a headache. Hale took her arm, not roughly, with the practiced firmness of someone who had done this before. Come on. She went. Not because she had no other choice. She was already running assessments, looking for angles. But because she understood, in this moment, that forcing a confrontation in a dark garage against 4 or 5 armed professionals was not a situation she would survive in the next 30 seconds. And surviving the next 30 seconds was the first priority. She went, and she thought, and she tried to locate Logan in her mind the way she sometimes located him at the office. Instinctively, the way you track someone you love in a crowded room. She hoped he was in the building. She had told herself all a week that he was overcalculating. She hoped, very badly, that she had been wrong. Otak. Logan heard the elevator arrive and the doors open, and then the lights go out in a single, overlapping sequence, and he was already moving when the emergency strips kicked on. He came around the south column, fast and low, staying inside the shadows the strips created rather than crossing through their light, and he covered the 40 feet to the elevator bank in a run that barely made sound because he had been moving quietly across hard floors. His entire adult life and silence under pressure was not something he had to think about. He saw the group, Vanessa, Hale, 4 others, and he saw the direction they were moving, and he did the geometry in under a second. They were heading to the northeast ramp and the waiting SUV, 30 meters. He had maybe 15 seconds before they reached the vehicle, and once she was in that vehicle, the parameters of this operation changed in every bad direction. The man posted near the elevator doors saw him coming. Logan hit him before he could say anything useful. A controlled strike to the throat that took the man's ability to produce sound before he could use it, followed by a takedown that was fast and quiet and ended with the man on the ground and Logan with the man's radio in his hand. He didn't stop moving. Hale must have heard something, some small displacement of sound, because he turned while Logan was still 6 meters out. Logan saw the recognition cross Hale's face in the red emergency light. Not who is this person, but the thing I was told wouldn't happen is happening. There is a specific expression people get when a plan meets an unplanned variable, and Logan had learned to move fastest in the moment before that expression resolves into action. He was on the second man, Jera, before Hale had fully reacted. What happened next was not cinematic. It was fast and ugly, and it left Logan with 2 cracked ribs and a cut across his forearm from a knife he hadn't quite blocked in time, and it left Jera and Torval and a third man he hadn't named yet on the concrete at varying stages of consciousness. Logan had fought better with less damage. He had also fought worse. He was 38, and his body no longer absorbed impact the way it had at 26, and he was aware of every place it complained even while he was ignoring the complaints. Hale had not joined the physical confrontation. Hale had, in the moment Logan engaged, moved to the SUV and opened the rear door. He was fast. Faster than Logan expected from a man who had been performing desk and radio security work for 6 weeks. Logan got there 3 seconds late. Hale had Vanessa in the vehicle and the door closed before Logan reached the passenger side. The driver, a man he hadn't accounted for, a 4th person in the car, not the 2 he'd clocked earlier, accelerated hard. Logan grabbed the door handle. The vehicle dragged him 6 feet across the concrete before his grip failed and he went down on his shoulder and the SUV swung up the ramp and into the night. He lay there for a moment on the cold concrete of level B2 with his ribs screaming and his arm bleeding and the sound of the vehicle disappearing up the ramp, and then he pushed himself up. Something small and gold caught the emergency strip light near his left hand. He reached for it. A chain. Thin, gold, the one she always wore. The one that held her wedding ring when she wasn't at home. It must have broken in the struggle. She must have been near him, closer than he'd processed. He held it in his hand. He had about 90 seconds before the men he'd put down started recovering. He needed to move, and he needed to think, and he needed to not look at this ring any longer than he already had. He closed his fingers around it and stood up. Damien Cross was still at the gala when his phone vibrated with Hale's message. Package acquired. En route. He read it twice, then deleted it with the trained casualness of someone who had been preparing for this moment for months. He put the phone back in his jacket pocket and accepted a drink from a passing waiter and said something pleasant to the woman beside him who was on the board's finance committee and had no idea that the CEO she had been chatting with 40 minutes ago was currently in the back of an SUV heading to a location Damien had been careful never to know. Plausible deniability was a craft. He had spent a long time learning it. He was not a violent man. He wanted to be clear about that in the internal accounting he kept. He had not ordered violence. He had facilitated a temporary removal of an obstacle, a business disruption, structured as a personal crisis that would resolve cleanly with Vanessa stepping back from Holloway Capital and Damien stepping naturally into the role he had been building toward for 6 years. The board would be shaken, there would be a transition period, but the structure would hold. His structure. The one he'd been quietly building while Vanessa had been occupied with her merger. The Arcturus deal would either be renegotiated on his terms or dissolved. He hadn't decided yet. There was time. He circulated the rooftop for another 20 minutes, long enough to establish his presence firmly in multiple conversations, long enough to be seen as someone who had remained at the event. Then he excused himself to make a call, found a quiet corner of the interior lounge, and stood with his drink and his phone and allowed himself a moment of something that felt cautiously like relief. His phone rang. Not a message, an actual call. Unknown number. He answered. The voice on the other end was flat and calm, and it said, "Your team is down. The operation had a complication. You need to understand that what you've put in motion tonight does not end where you thought it would end." He recognized neither the voice nor the number. His chest went cold. "Who is this?" he said. The line was already dead. At 10:47 p.m., Logan was in a car he had borrowed from a Holloway Capital Facilities van pool, using the company access card he still carried, driving east toward the waterfront. He had Rios on the phone. "I need the plate," he said. "Already running it," she said. "How bad are you?" "Functional?" That's not an answer. 2 ribs, maybe. Arms not deep. I'm functional. He changed lanes without slowing down. "The plate, Rios. Registered to a freight logistics company that dissolved 14 months ago. It's a shell." Keys clicking on her end. "But the vehicle had a transit pass tag. I can track the toll readers." More clicking. They took the BQE going toward Red Hook. Red Hook. Waterfront. Abandoned commercial space, industrial buildings. The kind of neighborhood that had been gentrifying for a decade without ever quite finishing. The kind of place that still had blocks of warehousing that moved between owners and tenants on paper without anyone ever actually standing inside them. "I know the area," Logan said. "Logan," her voice changed. "You need to call this in. NYPD, FBI, someone." By the time they set up a response, Vanessa is in the wind. He said it without emotion, as a logistics problem. "I need a location, not cavalry. If I can't get her out, I'll call it in. But I need 20 minutes. Rios was quiet for a moment. He could hear her working through it, weighing her own professional exposure against the years of something between them that wasn't quite friendship, but was close enough. 20 minutes, she said. Then I make the call myself. Fair enough. Where are they? Toll reader at the Gowanus Expressway overpass put them through at 10:31, last read before Red Hook. There's a cluster of warehouse properties on the north end of Van Brunt, 3 that are currently listed as vacant pending sale. She paused. I'm sending you the addresses. His phone buzzed. He looked at the first address, and something in his internal geometry said yes the way it sometimes did. The particular convergence of logistics, access, and cover that made a location work for this kind of operation. He drove. The warehouse was old in the way that nothing in New York is old, and everything in New York is old. It had been a cold storage facility once, then some form of light manufacturing, and now it was a vacant space with water-damaged walls and the specific smell of industrial abandonment, metal and damp and old lubricant. The power was live on a partial circuit, which meant someone had arranged that recently. Vanessa sat in a chair that had been placed in the center of the main floor, under one of the functioning overhead lights. Her hands were zip-tied in front of her. The charcoal dress she'd worn to the gala was torn slightly at the left shoulder. She was not injured. She was being watched by 2 men, not Hale, who had remained near the vehicle, and not Jera, who apparently hadn't made it to the extraction. Just two men she didn't know, sitting at a card table 20 feet away, not speaking. She had been assessing the space since they brought her in. It was a habit she had developed not from training, but from a professional life spent in rooms where she was usually the person people had underestimated. Learning to understand environments quickly was a survival skill, long before tonight gave it its most literal meaning. Two exits she could see. A loading bay door to the north, currently closed, chain padlocked from the inside. A regular door to the south, standing open. The two guards between her and both options. Probable additional personnel outside. Her phone was gone. They had taken it getting into the vehicle. The zip tie was tighter than necessary. Her wrists ached. She thought about Logan on the garage floor, going down under the vehicle's momentum, and she felt something move through her chest that was too complicated to identify clearly. Guilt and fear, and something fiercer underneath both of them. She had put her phone away. She had made a choice. The south door opened and a man walked in who was not one of the guards and not Hale. He was older, late 50s, with a heaviness to him that came from age settling into a large frame. He moved without hurry. He had the particular ease of someone who had been in situations like this many times, for whom this was a context that felt familiar. He pulled a folding chair from against the wall and set it down facing her and sat in it with his elbows on his knees, leaning forward slightly, as if they were about to have a casual conversation. "You're not who I wanted," he said. His English was accented but precise. "Then you should have double-checked before you grabbed me," Vanessa said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he smiled, a genuine smile, the kind people make when they're actually amused. "You understand this isn't about you. Your company, your merger, none of it interests me." "Then what does?" "Your husband." He let that word sit in the air for a moment. "Logan Pierce, the man you've been hiding, the man who spent 9 months cleaning your floors while he watched your building for threats." He tilted his head. "We found the marriage certificate 8 months ago. It took another 4 to find where you were keeping him. He's very good at being invisible." He paused. "He taught himself how, cleaning up the mess he made of my operation." Vanessa held his gaze. She didn't answer. She was processing. The timeline, the depth of what he knew, the specific implication of your husband spoken without any particular contempt, just as a fact. They knew about the marriage, which meant the secret she had guarded for 2 years, the thing she had kept from her board, from her colleagues, from the entire professional world she inhabited, had been known by people who meant them harm while she had been treating it as her own private liability management. The thing she had kept Logan in the shadows to protect had been the thing that painted a target on him. She did not let any of this cross her face. "His name is Marchetti," one of the guards said, to no one in particular, which struck her as an odd thing for a guard to volunteer, until she realized he was talking to someone in an earpiece and that the remark had not been for her at all. "Marchetti." She filed the name. "Where is he?" Marchetti asked. "Logan. He was at the hotel. My people tell me he was at the hotel, which means he knows something went wrong. Where will he go?" "I have no idea," Vanessa said. "We don't communicate that way." "You're his wife." "I'm also a CEO who runs a billion-dollar company. We don't keep each other's hourly schedule." She met his eyes. "He'll call the police." "That's what any reasonable person would do." Marchetti looked at her with something close to patience. "Logan Pierce has not called the police in any crisis situation in the past 8 years. This is a characteristic of his." He stood, moving the folding chair back to the wall. "He'll come here. That's fine. That's preferable." He said it the way someone says that's preferable when they mean that's what I've been counting on. He walked back toward the south door. At the threshold, he paused. "You should know," he said, without turning, "that I have no interest in harming you. This is about a debt, not about cruelty. When it's resolved, you'll go home." He looked back at her over his shoulder. "Whether he does depends on him." He left. The door stayed open. Vanessa sat in the chair and looked at the two guards and thought about Logan in the garage, going down. She thought about every conversation she had half paid attention to this week. She thought about Tuesday night at the kitchen table, him telling her, quietly, without drama, everything she had needed to hear and had chosen to file under maybe, later, not now. She thought about what it meant that the secret she'd kept to protect her career had been the very thing that made her useful as bait. She thought, He's coming. He's already on his way. And then she looked at the south door, still open, and the two guards at their card table. And she thought about the loading bay chain and what kind of chain it was and whether there was anything in arm's reach that could be used to change the geometry of this room before Logan arrived and found himself walking into something that had been designed specifically for him. She was zip-tied and alone in a warehouse, and her dress was torn, and she had made several bad decisions in the past 72 hours. She started working on the first problem she could actually do something about. The loading bay chain. She had seen the way it looped through the door handles. Not bolted, looped. If she could get to it. If she could create the right kind of distraction at the right moment. She looked at her wrists. Then she looked at the edge of the metal chair leg beside her foot. She had 8 years of listening to a man explain, in patient and specific terms, that the difference between a bad situation and a catastrophic one is the 30 seconds before you decide what to do. She had never been as good at patience as Logan was, but she was not nothing either. She shifted her weight forward in the chair and got to work. The drive to Red Hook took 19 minutes. Logan ran 2 red lights and didn't think about it. He had the radio from the garage guard on the passenger seat, volume low, and it had been quiet since he'd left the hotel. No chatter, no check-ins, which meant either the operation had moved to a different communication channel or Marchetti's team was disciplined enough to observe radio silence during transport. Both possibilities told him something. The silence of a professional operation was different from the silence of an amateur one. Professional silence had a texture to it, controlled, intentional, the kind that required training. He already knew who he was dealing with, but knowing it in the abstract and driving toward it at 11 at night with 2 damaged ribs and a cut that had soaked through the sleeve of his maintenance shirt were 2 different experiences, and he kept his mind on the logistics because the alternative, thinking too long about Vanessa in that car, about the chain breaking, about the ring in his pocket, was not useful. He reached into his pocket with his right hand and felt the chain there and put it back. Rios had sent 3 addresses. He drove past all 3 without stopping, once, at a reasonable speed, windows down, reading the buildings the way he'd learned to read terrain, not looking for the obvious signs but for the ones that a space gives off when it's been recently inhabited by people trying not to be noticed. The first address was too exposed, a corner lot, streetlight coverage on 2 sides, no good vehicle staging. The third was too deteriorated, the kind of structural decay that makes any operation inside it unpredictable. The second address was a former cold storage building set 40 feet back from the street on the north end of Van Brunt, with a loading dock on the west side and a chain-link perimeter that had been cut and resecured at some point in the last year. The parking area to the south had 2 vehicles, the black SUV and a second, older panel van. A man stood outside the south entrance, doing a very unconvincing impression of someone who was just standing there. Logan drove past and parked 2 blocks north. He sat in the van pool car for a moment and ran the inventory of what he had. The folding knife, the guard's radio, the building's geometry as he'd observed it on one pass. His own body, which was functional in the way that a machine is functional when several of its parts are stressed past normal operating parameters. It would work, but it would cost him, and he would have to account for that in every decision he made in the next hour. He thought about calling Rios. He thought about calling her and saying, "Call it in now, don't wait the 20 minutes." He thought about what 20 minutes of police response time meant in a situation that could move in seconds. He took the radio and the knife and got out of the car. The cut in the chain-link perimeter was on the northeast corner, which was the corner with the least light and the best natural cover from the street. He had expected that. He went through it low and moved along the building's east wall, staying in the shadow strip that the overhang created, testing each step on the gravel before committing his weight, making no sound that the ambient noise of the waterfront, wind off the water, a container ship moving somewhere in the distance, wouldn't absorb. The east wall had 2 windows, both covered from the inside. One had a thin line of light at its lower edge. He noted the light and kept moving. The building's north side had a service door that was padlocked from the outside, which meant it wasn't the active entry point, which meant it was the most useful to him. He examined the padlock with his phone's flashlight for 3 seconds. Standard commercial grade, he had the tools for it in his boot. 2 picks he carried as habitually as the knife, a habit Rios had once described as paranoid, and he had described as practical. 35 seconds later, the padlock was open. He put it back in position without closing it, eased the door inward 2 inches, and listened. Voices. One conversation, 2 people, to his left and deeper in the building. Farther away, a third voice, briefly, then quiet. The ambient sound of a large empty space. Old buildings have a specific acoustic quality, sound traveling differently across concrete and steel and open air, and he mapped what he heard against the building's exterior dimensions and came up with a rough interior layout. Main floor, probably 60 by 80 feet, with some kind of partition structure on the south end near the main entry. He opened the door wide enough to move through and stepped inside. The zip tie had taken Vanessa 11 minutes to work through, which was 11 minutes longer than she'd wanted and left her wrists raw where the plastic had bitten in before giving way. She had used the inside edge of the chair leg, a seam in the metal where a weld had been ground down, but not fully smoothed, working the tie back and forth in a motion that required her to hold her arms at an angle that made her shoulders ache. The guards at their card table hadn't looked over once. She had kept her posture neutral, her head still, presenting the image of a woman sitting quietly in a chair. She was good at presenting images. When the tie gave, she kept her wrists together for another 2 minutes, waiting, watching the guards' attention cycle through its patterns. They were not highly motivated watchmen. They spoke to each other occasionally in a language she didn't recognize, not Spanish, not French, something Eastern European. They checked their phones. The one on the left got up twice to walk to the south door and look outside, then came back. His routine was on a 7-minute cycle, approximately. She had identified the loading bay chain 30 feet to her north, looped through the bay door handles in a figure-8 pattern, not bolted as she'd assessed from the chair. A heavy commercial chain, padlocked, but the lock was on the interior side, which meant it was meant to keep people out, not in. From the inside, the chain could be lifted free of the handles if the lock was opened or if the loop was worked over the handle end. She didn't have a key. She had her hands. She waited for the left guard's next walk to the south door, and when his back was to her, she stood up from the chair in a single controlled motion, crossed the 15 feet to the bay door in a near-silent run on the concrete, and put her hands on the chain. It was cold and heavy, and the lock was a keyed padlock with no obvious workaround. She looked at the handle itself. A steel bar mounted through the door, bolted on both ends. She looked at the chain loop. The loop was generous, done in a hurry by someone who'd cared more about security than about the geometry of the loop. She pushed the chain upward along the handle toward the bolt end. The bolt had a nut on the interior side. The nut was hex, probably hand-tightened given the context. She put the chain down, braced one hand against the door, and applied torque to the nut with her fingers. It moved. Not easily. Whoever had installed it had decent grip strength. But it moved. She heard a footstep behind her. "Hey!" She turned. The right guard, the one who hadn't been doing the door walk, the one she hadn't been watching, was halfway to his feet from the card table, hand going to his hip. She said nothing. She picked up the chain in both hands and swung it. She had not been in a physical altercation since a self-defense class she'd taken at 24, which had been taught in a gym in Midtown and had not covered anything remotely like swinging a length of industrial chain at an armed man in a warehouse. What she had was adrenaline and the specific kind of desperation that removes hesitation the way surgery removes tissue, cleanly, without asking permission. The chain caught him across the forearm as he raised it. He went sideways. She hit him again, in the shoulder, less effectively, and then he was on her, bigger, faster, and she was already backing up, putting the chain between them, when she heard the south door bang open and the left guard's boots on the concrete coming fast. This was the part where her planning ran out. Logan heard the impact of the chain from 60 feet away, through 2 interior walls, and he moved from careful to fast in the same second, coming through the interior partition door at a run. What he saw: Vanessa backed against the bay door with the chain in her hands, one guard down holding his arm, the second guard crossing the floor toward her at speed. Marchetti nowhere visible. At least one person in the south entry corridor, movement. He hit the second guard from behind with a combination that took the man's balance first and his consciousness second, and the guard went down hard on the concrete and did not get up. Vanessa stood against the bay door with the chain still in both hands, breathing hard, and looked at Logan. He looked at her. She had a torn dress and raw wrists, and her hair was mostly down from whatever it had been at the gala, and her face had the particular quality it got when she was processing multiple things at once and trying not to let any of them show. "You're bleeding," she said. "I know," he said. "Are you hurt?" "No." She looked at his arm. "Logan, are you hurt?" He said it again, not as a question this time, as a request to focus. "No, I'm not hurt." "Good." He moved to her, checked her wrists briefly. The skin was abraded, no deep damage, and then turned to face the south corridor. "How many did you count?" "Inside 2, there's a man outside the south door. I saw him through the window when they brought me in. Marchetti and Hale somewhere." "Marchetti is here?" "He came in about 20 minutes ago. Left again. South door." She was already looking at the bay door behind her, the partially loosened nut on the handle bolt. "I almost had this open." "I have the north door. Come on." She dropped the chain. He went first, checking the corridor through the partition, and she followed close, moving the way she'd learned to move behind him in the 2 times before this that they'd had to leave a location quickly, keeping his pace, keeping distance enough not to crowd him, trusting the geometry of his decisions, even when she couldn't see the reasoning. They moved through the interior partition and along the east wall corridor toward the north service door. Logan kept the radio in his left hand, knife in his right. His ribs were a specific, insistent pain with every full breath, and he was not taking full breaths. 12 feet from the north door, the radio in his hand crackled. A voice, Hale's voice, said, "North exit is live. Don't let them reach the door." Logan stopped. He had 3 seconds, maybe 4, before whoever Hale had spoken to reached the north door from the outside. He looked at the corridor, the partition wall on his left, the building's exterior wall on his right. No cover, no alternate route. He made a decision that was less a decision than a recognition of the only available geometry. He turned back toward Vanessa and said quietly, "Change of plan. Back to the main floor." She looked at him. "That's where we came from." "I know." She didn't argue. They moved back. On the main floor, the 2 guards were still where Logan had left them, one conscious and holding his arm against the far wall, the other flat out near the bay door. The conscious one looked at Logan and made a calculation that Logan recognized, the calculation of a man who has been paid for a job and is currently reassessing whether the pay was sufficient. Logan met his eyes and said nothing. The man stayed against the wall. Vanessa went immediately to the bay door and put her hands back on the partially loosened nut. Logan positioned himself facing the south corridor, listening. Marchetti would come through that corridor or through the loading bay's exterior. 2 vectors. He had the knife. He had a 20-foot space. He had Vanessa working on the door behind him and a man on the wall who might stay neutral and might not. It was not a strong position. He had been in worse. "How close?" he asked without turning. 30 seconds. Maybe. "Take 20 of them." He heard the south corridor door. Not opening. A deliberate pause before opening, the kind of pause a person makes when they are listening before they move. Logan had done it himself 1,000 times. He recognized the texture of it. The door opened. Hale came through first because Hale was the professional. Marchetti would be behind him, and Marchetti would have at least one more person with him, given that his 2 interior guards were down. Hale saw Logan. He had a weapon now, a compact pistol, held correctly, pointed at Logan's center mass. Logan held the knife at his side and did not move. "Put it down," Hale said. "You first," Logan said. He said it conversationally, the way people say things when they want to buy time and want to sound like they're not buying time. Hale didn't move. He was good. Not theatrical, not emotional, just accurate and present. "We have the north exit covered. We have the street covered. The only way out of this building is through a conversation you and Mr. Marchetti need to have." "I'm not opposed to a conversation," Logan said, "but you point a weapon at my wife again, and we're done talking." Marchetti came through behind Hale. He looked, in the flat overhead light of the main floor, like what he was, an older man who had built a criminal operation from the ground up and had the specific patience of someone for whom years were nothing, because he had spent most of them waiting for moments like this one. He looked at Logan, the way a man looks at a problem he has been trying to solve for a long time. "You don't look like a janitor," Marchetti said. "That was kind of the point. Marchetti moved Hale aside with a small gesture and stepped forward. He wasn't armed, or wasn't visibly armed. He had a man in the corridor behind him, whose outline Logan could see through the doorway, hanging back. "Do you know what your team took from me in 2018? Marchetti said. "I know what the mission objectives were," Logan said. "I know what we were authorized to do." 47 people, Marchetti said. 47 people who worked for my organization. Men who had families. Who had children. He said it without heat, which was more unsettling than heat would have been. I am not a man who forgets that kind of debt. Some of those 47 people were running children across borders, Logan said, so I'm not going to apologize for the math. Something shifted in Marchetti's expression. Not anger, exactly. More like the specific displeasure of a man who has told himself a story about his own operation for long enough that contradiction feels like rudeness. The point, Marchetti said, is not the argument. The argument is old. The point is that you ruined something it took me 20 years to build, and you walked away to have a quiet life in New Jersey, and I didn't. He gestured, a small, precise gesture that took in the warehouse and everything that had led to it. So here we are. Here we are, Logan agreed. The bay door is open. Vanessa's voice came from behind Logan. He didn't turn, but he tracked it. She was at the bay door, which now had enough clearance to move through. She had done it in the time the conversation had taken. She had done it with raw wrists in a torn dress in a warehouse, and he felt something settle in his chest that was not the right moment for, but that he couldn't suppress entirely. Marchetti looked toward her. Hale shifted, recalibrating angle. "Don't," Logan said. He said it to Hale, and something in his voice made Hale stop. Not from fear exactly, but from the specific recalibration that happens when a person understands that the man they're pointing a weapon at has already decided he's willing to pay whatever the next few seconds cost. "Logan," Vanessa's voice again, steady. "Come on." He kept his eyes on Hale and Marchetti. He measured the distance, 15 feet to the bay door. He measured what Hale would do in the 2 seconds it would take to cover it. He measured his own damaged ribs and what pushing off a sprint would cost him. He took 3 steps backward toward the door. Hale moved. Logan had already dropped below the pistol's line when Hale pulled the trigger, and the round went over his left shoulder and into the concrete wall beyond it, and Logan closed the distance to Hale in under a second. Not retreating to the door, but going forward, into Hale, because the only safe place from a close-range pistol is inside it. What followed was short and extremely costly. Hale was trained. Not SEAL level, but trained. Former military of some kind, Logan assessed from the way he moved. The pistol went away in the first 2 seconds because Logan's priority was always the weapon first, everything else second. After that, it was weight and leverage and pain. Logan's cracked ribs taking impact that made his vision sharp and white at the edges. And then Hale was on the floor, and the pistol was in Logan's hand. He stood up. His breathing was bad. He could feel the specific deep ache of a rib that had moved past cracked, and was now potentially something worse. Marchetti had not moved. He stood 15 feet away with his hands slightly raised. Not a surrender posture, more a deliberate display of stillness. Behind him in the corridor, the man whose outline Logan had tracked had disappeared. Either run or repositioning, and Logan didn't have the bandwidth to determine which. He pointed the pistol at Marchetti. Marchetti looked at it and looked at Logan with something that might have been, in different circumstances, professional respect. "You have a choice," Logan said. "Walk to the wall, sit down, and this ends tonight with everyone intact." "It doesn't end tonight," Marchetti said. "You understand that?" "It ends enough for tonight," Logan said. "I have a daughter at home. I want to go get her. Walk to the wall." Marchetti looked at him for a long moment. Then he turned and walked to the far wall and sat on the floor with his back against the concrete. Logan backed to the bay door. Vanessa was already on the other side, in the cold night air of the loading dock. He went through and pulled the door behind him, and they were outside. The waterfront smell hitting him, the city noise resuming like it had never stopped, the particular absurdity of ordinary life continuing 8 feet away from whatever that had just been. Vanessa grabbed his arm, not the injured one. She found the other one, which he noted. Even now she was tracking details. "Can you run?" she said. "I can move fast," he said. "It won't look like running." They moved north along the building's exterior, along the chain-link perimeter, toward the cut he'd made coming in. He was holding the pistol at his side and watching behind them, and she was keeping pace without being told, and neither of them said anything because there was nothing useful to say in the next 90 seconds that couldn't wait until after the next 90 seconds. He went through the fence, cut first, held it for her, and then they were on the street. Van Brunt, quiet at this hour, a few parked cars, nobody visible. He moved toward the Vanpool car 2 blocks north at a pace that looked, to anyone watching, like 2 people walking fast with intention rather than 2 people who had just come out of a situation that should have killed one or both of them. He called Rios from the car. She picked up on the first ring. "Talk to me." "She's out. I'm out. Marchetti is in the warehouse, unarmed, no injuries. I've got Hale's weapon." He started the car. "Make the call." "Already dialing," she said. "Logan, are you good?" He looked at Vanessa in the passenger seat. She had her knees together and her hands in her lap, and she was staring forward through the windshield at the empty street, breathing. There was a bruise forming along her left cheekbone that he hadn't noticed in the warehouse. Something from the garage, probably, during the abduction. Her wrists were red. She had found a way out of a zip tie and swung a chain at a man twice her size and worked a bolt loose under pressure. She had not fallen apart. Not for a second. "I'm okay," he said to Rios. "Call it in." He pulled onto the street and drove. They were 3 blocks from the warehouse when Vanessa said, "You knew it was Marchetti?" "I knew it was someone from the 2018 mission." Rios confirmed Marchetti specifically. "Why didn't you tell me his name?" "Because you had the Arcturus deal, and I didn't want to give you a name without having something solid behind it." He paused. "That was wrong. I should have told you." She was quiet for a moment. "The marriage certificate. He said they found it 8 months ago." "I know. They've been watching us for 8 months." "At least." She let that sit. Then, "He called me Mrs. Pierce." Logan didn't say anything. "The board is going to find out," she said. "This will be in the news. There's no version of what happened tonight that doesn't go public." She said it not with distress, exactly, more with the quality of someone who has been running a mental simulation and has arrived at an output she didn't plan for. "I know," Logan said. "I kept you in that building for 9 months to protect—" She stopped, started again. "I kept you hidden because I thought it was protecting something." "You thought it was protecting me," he said. "That's not nothing. It wasn't protecting you. They already knew." She turned her head and looked at him, and in the passing streetlights her face was tired and complicated and more open than she usually allowed in any context. "It was protecting my reputation. Let's say what it was." He didn't answer immediately. He drove for a block. Then, people protect things the best way they know how at the time. That's all any of us ever do. That's a very generous read. It's the accurate one. He glanced at her. "I hid things from you too. I've been running a threat assessment on your building for 9 months, and I gave you pieces of it instead of the whole picture because I didn't want to, I don't know, frighten you, make myself into a problem you had to manage." She looked at him. "Were you frightened tonight?" He thought about it honestly. "Not the way people usually mean it. He searched for the word. "I was very focused on getting to you. Everything else kind of compresses when that's the priority." She looked forward again. "I was frightened," she said. "When I heard the shot inside the warehouse. That 1 second before I heard you on the other side of the door." He heard what that cost her to say and didn't make more of it than it was. "I know," he said. "I put my phone away," she said. "In the elevator. You texted me and I put the phone away." "I know. I'm sorry." He reached across the console and found her hand, and she turned hers over and held his. Neither of them said anything after that for a while. He took the on-ramp toward Manhattan. Somewhere behind them, the first sirens were beginning, distant, moving toward Van Brunt, toward a warehouse where Marchetti was sitting against a wall and Hale was on the floor, and the whole elaborate machinery of a revenge operation was waiting to be dismantled by people with proper authority and proper equipment and jurisdiction. Logan had let Marchetti live. He had made that decision in the warehouse, and he was at peace with it. There had been a version of this that ended differently. He had felt it available to him, the way certain choices make themselves felt as options before you take them. He had not taken it. Not because of mercy exactly, more because there was a 7-year-old in a house in New Jersey who needed to know from everything she observed that her father was a man who chose restraint when restraint was possible. That mattered more than the debt. He drove. The city moved past the windows. Vanessa held his hand and looked out at it and didn't speak, and he didn't ask her to. At a red light on the BQE, she said, "The Arcturus deal. What about it?" "It's still in 8 days." He looked at her. She had a bruise on her cheekbone and abraded wrists, and she had been kidnapped 4 hours ago, and she was thinking about the Arcturus deal. He loved her. He had known that for a long time, but knowing something and feeling it with sudden, specific force in a particular moment were not always the same experience. "It'll still be there in 8 days, he said. She was quiet. Then, "I know." She squeezed his hand once. "I just needed to say it out loud." He nodded and drove. They were 20 minutes from the Garcia house, where Lily was asleep in a guest bed with no idea that her father had just come out of a warehouse in Red Hook, and her stepmother was sitting in the passenger seat of a borrowed van with her hair down and her knees together and a bruise forming on her face, holding his hand on the BQE at 12:30 on a Saturday morning. Logan drove, and his ribs hurt, and the ring was in his pocket, and for the first time since Wednesday, he felt the specific and improbable relief of the thing you were most afraid of not happening. It was a small feeling in a large night. He held on to it anyway. They picked up Lily at 1:15 in the morning. Rosa Garcia had been awake. Of course she had. Rosa was the kind of woman who stayed up when something felt wrong and didn't pretend otherwise. She opened the door before Logan knocked, took one look at the two of them, and said nothing except, "She's in the back room. I'll get her." While Rosa went down the hall, her husband Diego appeared from the kitchen with 2 glasses of water and set them on the entry table without comment. He was a man of 60 who had known Logan for 4 years and had never asked a single question about his employment history, his past, or why he sometimes showed up at unusual hours with the particular stillness of a person who has recently been through something and is not prepared to discuss it. Diego simply operated on the principle that people he trusted didn't owe him explanations. Logan had always appreciated that more than he'd said. Vanessa took the water. She drank half of it standing in the Garcia entry hall with her torn dress and her bruised cheekbone and her hair pulled back roughly with a rubber band Rosa had handed her at the door. And she looked, for the first time in Logan's memory, like someone who had stopped performing composure because there was nobody in the room who required the performance. Rosa came back with Lily, who was 7 years old and mostly asleep, wearing her pajamas and carrying her shoes in one hand because she had apparently packed them before sleeping on the principle that she might need them. Logan crouched down and she walked into him without waking fully, and he lifted her and held her and felt her weight against his damaged ribs, and did not let that change anything about how he held her. "Dad," she said, from somewhere in the vicinity of his shoulder. "Hey, Bug. Are we going home?" "Yeah, we're going home." She was asleep again before they reached the car. Vanessa held the back door open while Logan settled Lily across the seat and buckled her in. He straightened up slowly. The ribs were worse now that the adrenaline had fully cleared, settling into a deep, grinding ache that lived at the bottom of every breath. Vanessa watched him do it and didn't say anything until he was in the driver's seat. "Hospital," she said, "after we're home." "I'm okay." "Logan? I'll go in the morning. I'm not leaving Lily in an ER waiting room at 2 a.m. She looked at him. He could feel her working out whether this was stubbornness or a reasonable calculation, and after a moment she settled back in her seat in the way she did when she decided a battle wasn't worth the current cost. "First thing in the morning," she said. "First thing," he agreed. They drove home through empty streets, and Lily slept across the back seat, and the city moved past the windows the way it always did. Indifferent, enormous, ongoing. And neither Logan nor Vanessa spoke, which was not awkward, but the opposite of awkward. It was the particular quiet of two people who have been through something together and don't need to process it out loud yet. The news broke at 6:40 the next morning. Logan was asleep on the couch. He had taken the couch because lying flat aggravated the ribs, and the couch allowed him to stay at a slight incline when his phone started going. He had set it face down, but he could feel the vibration pattern through the cushion, and after the fourth call in 6 minutes, he picked it up. Rios. Then 2 unknown numbers. Then Marcus, Vanessa's assistant, whose name in Logan's phone was simply Marcus V. He called Marcus back. "Shh, she's asleep," Logan said. "What's happening?" "It's everywhere," Marcus said. He sounded the way Marcus rarely sounded. Rattled. A word Logan would not normally apply to a man who had managed Vanessa Holloway's professional life for 6 years. Every business outlet, 3 national networks, local news. The story is the kidnapping. NYPD press office confirmed it at 5:30 a.m. But someone got hold of Logan. Someone leaked the marriage certificate. Logan sat up. His ribs registered the movement. "Who?" he said. "We don't know yet." The documents went to 4 outlets simultaneously, which means it wasn't a single source leak. Someone with access to the original filing or a copy of it. A pause. Damien's office has already released a statement. He's calling for an emergency board session. He's framing it as, he's saying the board needs to assess whether Ms. Holloway's personal circumstances constitute a material disclosure failure. He's using last night to make a move. He was going to make a move regardless. Last night just gave him something to point at. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "How is she?" Logan looked down the hall toward the bedroom. The door was closed. "She's okay. She's sleeping." He stood, carefully. "Don't call her for another 2 hours. Whatever Damien is doing, it can wait 2 hours. The board chair has already, 2 hours, Marcus." A pause. Then, "Okay, 2 hours." He hung up and went to the kitchen and made coffee and stood at the window with it, watching the street below in the early morning light. The city was waking up the way it always did, slowly and then completely, like a switch being thrown. A delivery truck, a woman walking a dog, a man on a phone talking to someone he appeared to be arguing with about something that was, from this remove, entirely silent. He thought about Damien Cross, who had spent the night in his own home while Marchetti's men had a pistol trained on Logan in a warehouse, and who was now using the wreckage of what he'd helped engineer to make a play for the thing he'd wanted all along. Logan had met men like Damien many times, in many contexts. In the military, they were usually staff officers who managed to be present for someone else's success and invisible for their own failures. They were rarely the most dangerous people in the room, but they were often the most persistent, because persistence didn't require courage, and they had none of the latter and plenty of the former. He heard Lily's door open at 7:15. She appeared in the kitchen in her pajamas, hair disordered, with the particular expression of a child who is not fully awake but has questions. "Why are we home?" she said. "We came home late. You were asleep." She looked at him, then at his arm, which had a bandage on it that Rosa had helped with the previous night. Not hospital grade, but clean and adequate for the night. "What happened to your arm?" "I got a cut at work." She considered this with the evaluative silence of a child who is deciding whether to accept an explanation. Then, "Is Vanessa okay?" "She's sleeping." Her face had a bruise. He looked at his daughter. She had been mostly asleep when they'd picked her up. He had underestimated how much she'd taken in. "She had a hard night," he said. "She's okay." Lily sat down at the kitchen table. She pulled her knees up to her chest in the chair and looked at him with her mother's dark eyes and said, "Dad, what's going on?" He sat down across from her. He thought about what to say and how much of it was appropriate for Seven, and how much of it she would work out on her own regardless of what he told her. "Some people tried to hurt our family," he said, "because of something I did a long time ago, before you were born. They thought they could get to me through Vanessa. It didn't work. Everyone is okay." She processed this. "Did you stop them?" "We stopped them," he said. "Together." She was quiet for a moment. "Are they gone now? The people?" "The police have them." She nodded. Then she got up, went to the refrigerator, and got the orange juice out with the seriousness of a person who has decided that the world is manageable and breakfast is the next appropriate step. She poured 2 glasses and brought them to the table and pushed one toward him. "You should eat something," she said. "You look tired." He looked at his daughter. She was 7 years old, and she had just told him to eat something with the matter-of-fact care of a person who had decided that taking care of the people around her was simply what you did. "Yeah," he said. I know. Vanessa woke at 8:30 and knew before she opened her eyes that the world had changed shape while she was sleeping. She could feel it the way you can sometimes feel weather before it arrives. A pressure, an altered quality to the air. She lay still for a moment. The bruise on her cheekbone had stiffened overnight, pulling at the skin when she moved her jaw. Her wrists were wrapped in a bandage Logan had applied at 2 in the morning, working carefully in the bathroom light while she sat on the edge of the tub and tried not to react to the antiseptic. She reached for her phone on the nightstand. 47 notifications. She sat up and read through them in the specific mode she'd developed over years of managing crises, taking the information in as data, deferring the emotional response, building a picture. The kidnapping story. The marriage certificate. Damien's statement. The board chair's message, arriving at 6 a.m., which was direct and not unkind, but which made clear that an emergency session had been called for Monday morning. She set the phone down and sat at the edge of the bed for a moment. She had built Holloway Capital over 8 years of decisions that had cost her things she had paid without flinching. Relationships, sleep, the version of herself that didn't think in quarterly timelines. She had made it to 30 years old as the CEO of a firm that people twice her age had told her she would never be able to run, and she had proved them wrong in the specific way she preferred, quietly, thoroughly, and with documentation. And now the thing that might bring it down was not a failed acquisition or a market correction or a competitor who had outmaneuvered her. It was a marriage certificate and a man named Damien Cross who had been waiting for a lever long enough to use it. She stood up, went to the bathroom, looked at her face in the mirror, the bruise, the tired eyes, the hair that needed attention. She had looked worse. She had started from worse. She took a shower and put on clothes and walked to the kitchen where Logan was at the table with Lily, and there were 2 empty juice glasses and the smell of eggs cooking on the stove. Lily looked up. "Hi." "Hi," Vanessa said. "Dad made eggs. Do you want some?" Vanessa looked at Logan at the stove, who was cooking with his left hand and holding his right arm slightly against his body in the way people hold an injury when they're trying to pretend it isn't one. He looked at her over his shoulder. "How's your face?" he said. "Sore." "How are your ribs?" "Sore." "You need to go to the hospital." "After breakfast." She sat down at the table. Lily slid the orange juice toward her without being asked. It was such a small gesture that it almost passed without registering. But it didn't pass, and Vanessa felt it land somewhere specific and stay. "Thank you," she said. Lily shrugged. "You look tired," she said. "Like Dad." Logan came back from the urgent care clinic at noon with confirmation of what he already knew. 2 cracked ribs, one more significantly displaced than he'd assessed, a recommendation to rest that he was going to honor in the partial way that people honor medical recommendations when the world doesn't stop requiring things from them. They wrapped him. They gave him anti-inflammatories. He drove home. He found Vanessa at the kitchen table with her laptop and her phone and a coffee that had been there long enough to be cold. And she was on a call. Her voice controlled, precise. The CEO voice fully reinstalled. He listened from the hallway long enough to understand she was talking to her legal counsel, running through the disclosure question, building the case for what she was going to say to the board on Monday. He went and sat with Lily in the living room where she was drawing at the coffee table with the focused intensity she applied to anything she decided deserved focus, and they sat quietly together while Vanessa's voice continued from the kitchen, measured and purposeful, and to someone who knew her well enough, something else as well. A quality underneath the control, not fear. Something more like decision. She was deciding something. He could hear it in the way her sentences were structured, the particular precision of a person who is not just describing a position but committing to one. He picked up his phone and texted her, even though she was 30 feet away. "You don't have to fight this alone." A minute passed. Then, "I know. That's what I'm deciding." He put the phone down and watched Lily draw. The Monday board meeting was in the 42nd floor conference room, which had floor-to-ceiling windows facing south and a long table that seated 24, and which Vanessa had, over 3 years, learned to treat as a kind of arena. Not hostile exactly, but requiring the same quality of attention that arenas require. You had to know where the exits were. You had to know who was watching whom. She arrived 20 minutes early, which was her habit. She set up her materials, checked the room layout, and stood at the window for 2 minutes looking at the city below, which was doing its ordinary morning things, completely indifferent to the fact that her career was about to be contested in this room. Damien Cross arrived at 8:58, 2 minutes before the session was scheduled. He was dressed well and composed and moved into the room with the ease of a man who believes the situation has already resolved in his favor. He did not speak to Vanessa. He took his seat at the far end of the table and made a show of reviewing documents. Board members filed in over the following 5 minutes, 14 of the 16 voting members. The chair, William Hargrove, who was 71 and had been in capital markets for 40 years, and who had, Vanessa knew, a deep institutional skepticism about disruption of any kind. 2 independent members, the rest a mix of inherited seats and earned ones. They were not hostile. They were, most of them, uncertain, the specific uncertainty of people who have been presented with unexpected information and are waiting to understand how to process it. That was workable. Uncertainty was workable. Uncertainty meant the question was still open. Hargrove opened the session without preamble. Given the events of Friday evening and the information that subsequently became public, the board has an obligation to address 2 questions. First, the matter of disclosure. Second, the matter of confidence in current leadership. Mr. Cross has requested the opportunity to address both. Damien spoke for 12 minutes. He was measured, not dramatic. He had the intelligence to know that drama would read badly in this room, and precision would read better. He framed the marriage as an undisclosed personal relationship with a building employee, which he characterized as a potential liability and a breach of the transparency the board was owed. He did not mention the kidnapping directly, but he circled it, the events of Friday, in a way that implied connection without stating it, which was, Logan would have said if he'd been in the room, a very clean piece of manipulation. When Damien finished, Hargrove turned to Vanessa. She had prepared a statement. She had worked on it Saturday and Sunday with her legal counsel and Marcus, and on Sunday evening, alone in the kitchen after Lily was in bed, in the specific silence of a person who is writing something that costs them something real to write. She had drafts, she had bullet points, she had supporting documentation. She put all of it face down on the table in front of her, because Saturday morning, sitting at the kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee and 47 notifications, she had decided something. She had decided that the version of herself who had spent 2 years managing perception and hiding her husband and building an elaborate architecture of professional distance was a version she was no longer willing to inhabit. Not because it had failed. It had, in many ways, worked. She had protected her position and kept the board's attention on her performance rather than her personal life and closed deal after deal from inside the fortress she'd constructed. It had worked right up until the moment it hadn't. But more than that, it had been wrong. Not strategically wrong, sometimes strategically right. Just wrong in the way that treating a person you love as a liability is wrong, regardless of the business justification. She looked at the 14 board members, and she looked at Damien Cross, and she put her hands flat on the table. "I'm going to say 2 things," she said, "and then I'd like to address something else entirely." She said, "My husband's name is Logan Pierce. We've been married for 2 years. I kept our marriage private because I anticipated exactly the kind of conversation we're having right now. And I want to be honest that my calculation was self-serving. I was protecting my position. That was my choice, and I own it." She paused. "What I won't do is characterize my husband as a liability or a disclosure failure. He is a decorated veteran who left a dangerous career to raise his daughter. He is the most capable person I have met in my professional or personal life. The reason he was in this building was not as a janitor. It was because he was protecting me from a threat that neither of us could fully name yet. He was right. And I was wrong. And on Friday night, he went into a warehouse alone and brought me home." She let that sit. "That is the man I married." Silence. Then she said, "The second thing is this." She looked at Damien. "Victor Hale, who Mr. Cross personally recommended for the security director position, is currently in federal custody. He is cooperating with investigators. The communications between Mr. Cross and Mr. Hale over the past 8 weeks have been subpoenaed. I received confirmation of this from federal investigators at 7:40 this morning. She opened the folder she had kept closed beside her. I have a copy of the subpoena here for the board's review. Damian Cross had the quality, in that moment, of a person who has discovered that the floor they are standing on extends considerably less far than they thought. He said, "That is not—" He stopped. "I'm not accusing you of anything," Vanessa said, with a precision that was more cutting for its evenness. "The investigators will do that if the evidence supports it. What I am saying to this board is that the conversation Damian has called this meeting to have was requested by a man whose communications with the individuals who kidnapped me on Friday night are currently under federal review." She closed the folder. "I leave it to your judgment what to do with that." The room was quiet. Hargrove looked at Damian. Damian was looking at the table with the expression of a man running through his options and finding them fewer than he had believed 20 minutes ago. What happened over the following 90 minutes was not dramatic. Board proceedings rarely are. They happen in the key of institutional process, procedural and careful and slower than a crisis deserves. But the outcome was clear enough before it was formal. 2 board members asked pointed questions about Hale's hiring process. Damian answered them with the declining fluency of a man whose story is losing structural integrity. Hargrove called a recess at 10:40, and when the board reconvened at 11:15, he announced that pending the federal investigation's findings, the board was satisfied that the CEO had acted within her fiduciary authority and that the matter of personal disclosure did not constitute a material breach requiring action. Damian Cross left the room at 11:17 without speaking to anyone. Vanessa sat with her materials for another few minutes after the other board members filed out. Marcus appeared in the doorway at 11:25 with coffee that was actually hot, which she took. "The Arcturus legal team called," he said. "They want to confirm Thursday's signing. Tell them Thursday works." He nodded. He was about to go, and then he stopped. "For what it's worth," he said, "the thing you said about him, your husband." He seemed to be deciding how much to continue. It was the right thing to say. "I know," she said. "It was also true, which helps." He nodded again and left. She sat alone in the conference room for another 3 minutes, looking at the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and then she picked up her phone and called Logan. He answered on the second ring. She could hear Lily in the background asking something about lunch. "How did it go?" he said. "We're okay," she said. "The board is satisfied. Damian's going to have a different kind of problem shortly." She paused. "How are your ribs?" "Worse than this morning, better than Friday." That is a very Logan Pierce answer. It's accurate. She looked at the table, at the folder with the subpoena copy, at the coffee Marcus had brought her. "I said something about you," she said. "In the meeting. I want you to know that." He was quiet for a moment. "What did you say?" She told him. Not word for word. She wasn't someone who repeated her own speeches. It felt like vanity. But the substance of it. Who he was. What he had done. She told him she had said it in front of 14 board members and she had not qualified it, and she had not been ashamed. The silence on his end was a specific kind of silence. She had learned over 2 years to read his silences the way she read rooms, by their quality, by what they didn't contain. This one didn't contain surprise or discomfort. It contained something that didn't have a clean name, something that had been waiting a long time to be set down. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay?" she said. "I don't know what else to say to that." A pause. She could hear him shifting carefully. Ribs. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. I should have said it a year ago." "Yeah," he said. "Maybe. But you said it now." In the background, Lily said, "Dad, she said grilled cheese, not—" And the rest was lost under the sound of a 7-year-old's vigorous culinary disagreement, and Vanessa sat in the conference room on the 42nd floor and laughed. A real laugh, unmanaged, the kind that starts before you've decided to let it. "Go make lunch," she said. "I'll be home by 4. "We'll be here," he said. She hung up. She sat for another moment. Then she gathered her materials, straightened the folder, and stood up from the table. She had a merger to close and a company to run and a life to rebuild from different materials than the ones she'd been using. She picked up her coffee. She walked out of the conference room, down the hall, past the executive elevator bank, past the door to the stairwell, where Logan had spent 9 months being invisible in a building that had turned out to be less safe than either of them knew, past the offices of people who were, this morning, learning something new about the CEO they worked for. Something that made her, to her own surprise, feel less armored rather than more vulnerable. She walked through all of it without slowing down. The day was going to be long. She already had 12 things waiting. The Arcturus signing was in 3 days, and the federal investigation was going to generate paperwork and questions and probably a deposition or two. And Damian Cross's departure was going to create a structural gap on the strategy team that she would need to address before quarter's end. None of this frightened her. It was just the next set of problems, and she had always been at her best with a clear set of problems in front of her. What felt different, walking through the 42nd floor toward her office on a Monday morning with a bruised face and a husband who was home making lunch with his cracked ribs and a daughter who pushed orange juice toward you without being asked, what felt different was that she was not carrying any of it alone anymore. She had been, for most of her adult life, very good at alone. It turned out she was even better at this. The Arcturus signing happened on a Thursday, 6 days after a warehouse in Red Hook, and 3 days after a board meeting that had quietly reordered the architecture of Holloway Capital's leadership without anyone filing a formal motion or raising a formal vote. It happened the way most significant things happen in finance. In a conference room with lawyers over documents that represented years of work compressed into signatures and initials and a handshake at the end that was photographed for a press release. $12 billion. The deal that Vanessa had carried through 3 years of preparation and 8 days of near catastrophe, signed on a Thursday morning with her legal team and the Arcturus principals, and Marcus standing near the door with a phone full of notifications he was managing in real time. She signed her name in the place designated for CEO, Holloway Capital. The pen was the same one she used for every signing, a black rollerball she had bought at a drugstore in Midtown 7 years ago for $4. Which she kept because she was superstitious in the specific way of people who will not admit to being superstitious. It had signed 11 major acquisitions. It had no significance beyond what she had assigned to it, but she had assigned it a great deal. She signed, and the room exhaled in the collective way of people who have been holding something for a long time and are finally allowed to set it down. And the Arcturus CEO, a man named Gerald Park, who was 63 and had built his company from a 2-person consulting firm, and who had, over 3 months of negotiations, developed a genuine respect for Vanessa that had nothing to do with her age or gender and everything to do with the precision of her mind, reached across the table and shook her hand with both of his. "Congratulations," he said. "You earned this one." "We both did," she said. He smiled. He had seen the news from the previous weekend. Everyone had. And he had not mentioned it until now, and he didn't fully mention it now either, just gave her hand an extra pressure before releasing it, which said the thing without requiring either of them to say it out loud. She accepted that. She was learning, slowly, to accept the things people offered that didn't require translation. The federal investigation moved faster than Logan had expected, and slower than the news cycle wanted. Hale began cooperating within 48 hours of his arrest, which Rios told Logan with the particular tone of a person who is not surprised but is still somewhat gratified. The cooperation was substantial. Hale had documentation, communications, financial records, because Hale was, at his core, a professional who had made a professional calculation about where his best interests lay now that the operation had failed. He had no loyalty to Marchetti beyond the contract. The contract had produced an outcome he had not been paid enough to absorb. Marchetti himself did not cooperate. That was predictable. He had survived 2 decades in a business that required the specific ability to keep your mouth closed under pressure, and age and arrest had not changed his fundamental nature. He sat across from federal investigators and said very little, and what he said was in the key of a man who believes, not entirely without justification, that institutions are slower than people and that time is always on the side of patience. What he had not fully accounted for was the reach of the 2018 classified mission records, which were partially declassified specifically for the federal prosecution over a period of 3 weeks in October. Logan had a single conversation with a federal attorney during that period, a woman named Chen, precise and methodical, who had the quality of someone who has spent years building cases that never go wrong because she refuses to move faster than the evidence. And in that conversation, he laid out, for the first time in a room with a recorder running, Everything the 2018 mission had found inside Marchetti's network. The transit routes, the financial structures, the names. It took 4 hours. Chen asked very few questions. When it was over, she closed her notebook and said, "Mr. Pierce, why did you let him live? In the warehouse?" Logan had thought about how to answer that if anyone asked. "Because killing him would have solved one problem and created several others," he said. "And because I have a daughter." Chen looked at him for a moment. "That's a complete answer," she said. Marchetti was indicted on 14 counts in November. His trial was set for the following spring. Logan did not expect to be unaffected by that process. There would be testimony. There would be exposure of things he had kept private for 8 years. There would be a period of being visible in ways he had structured his entire post-military life to avoid. He was making his peace with that. It was the cost of the thing he had chosen, and the thing he had chosen was his family. And that math was not complicated. What was more complicated, and what he did not entirely resolve in those weeks, was the question of who he was now. The janitor was gone. That cover had ended definitively in a parking garage. The seal was not a current identity, hadn't been for 8 years. What remained was a man who had spent 9 months watching a building and had, when it mattered, been exactly what the situation required. That was something. He wasn't sure yet what to call it. Vanessa called it straightforwardly because she had never had much patience for the kind of self-inquiry that produced fog instead of clarity. "You're a man who is good at keeping people safe," she said, one night in early October, when they were in the kitchen after Lily was in bed and the day's noise had settled. "That is what you are, but the title is a detail." "The title matters to how it's structured," he said. "Then structure it the way it works," she said. "But don't tell me you don't know who you are. I've watched you for 2 years. I know who you are." He looked at her. "Who am I?" "Someone who notices the thing everyone else walks past," she said, "and does something about it." She poured her coffee and set the pot down. "That's not a small thing, Logan. That's actually most of what the world needs and consistently fails to find." He didn't answer that. He didn't need to. He just sat with it, the way he sat with things that were true and required time rather than response. The security advisory role was Vanessa's idea, and she brought it to him with the specific qualities she brought to proposals she had already decided on, but was willing to present as open questions. She did it in mid-October, 3 weeks after the board meeting, after the Arcturus signing, after the news cycle had moved on to its next thing and left the story of the Holloway Capital CEO and her secret husband janitor to settle into the particular cultural sediment where true stories go when they're too complicated for a clean narrative. "I want to build something," she said. "A security function that's actually built for what our environment requires. Not a department, not a standard corporate security model. Something that understands the intersection of operational intelligence and corporate exposure." "You want to hire me," Logan said. "I want to offer you the role if you want it. It's different from hiring." "What's the difference?" "One I need, one I think you might need too." She looked at him directly. "You've been running a private operation inside this company for 9 months. You were right about everything. I would like to make it official and compensate you appropriately and give you the authority that matches what you've already been doing." He thought about it, not the decision. He had already been moving towards some version of this in his own thinking, and he recognized the shape of it when she named it. What he thought about was the way it needed to be structured. "I'm not taking an executive title," he said. "No VP, no C-suite." "I know." "I need to be able to take Lily to school." "I know that too." "And I'm not wearing a suit." She smiled, a real smile, the kind she didn't produce on demand. "The facility's uniform is probably non-negotiable in the other direction," she said, "but I think we can find something in between." He said yes. He said it the way he made most decisions, without ceremony, directly, as though the deliberation had already happened somewhere else, and this was just the acknowledgement. What he did not do, and what she did not ask him to do, was become a public figure. The role was quiet by design. He came and went from the 42nd floor through the executive elevator now, which Lily found, when she learned about it, entirely satisfying. "You should have been doing that the whole time," she said, with the conviction of a child who has clear opinions about fairness. He worked from an office on the 39th floor that had no nameplate and that most employees assumed was a conference room that was always somehow in use. He built a security protocol that was thorough without being theatrical, because the theatrical kind was mostly for the people running it, and the quiet kind was for the people it was meant to protect. He was good at it. He had always been good at it. Now he was just doing it with a salary and a company laptop, and occasionally having to sit in meetings where he was the only person in the room without a title on a business card, which bothered him not at all. Damian Cross's resignation came on a Tuesday in early November, which was the same day that federal investigators formally notified Holloway Capital that the communications subpoena had yielded material relevant to the kidnapping case. The resignation was phrased as voluntary and was accompanied by a legal statement affirming that Mr. Cross denied any direct involvement in the events of October and would cooperate fully with any investigation. Vanessa read the statement in her office with Marcus standing in the doorway and said, "Noted. Who's next on the strategy team?" "Julia Reeves," Marcus said. "She's been running the Arcturus integration work." "Good. Schedule time with her this week." That was the entirety of her public response to the departure of the man who had, with careful deniability, helped engineer her kidnapping. It was not indifference. She was not indifferent. She had spent 2 nights in October working through what had been done and how she felt about it, arriving at something that was not forgiveness exactly, and not continuing anger either. Something more like, the account had been settled by forces outside her control, and she was releasing her grip on the outcome because holding it served nothing. She was not naturally a person who released grip easily. It was a thing she had to practice, like patience. What she did allow herself, in private, in the specific privacy of the kitchen at 11 p.m., when Lily was asleep and Logan was at the table with his laptop and the city was doing its quiet nighttime things outside the window, was the occasional acknowledgement that it had been frightening. Not the warehouse. She had moved through the warehouse on adrenaline and problem-solving and something close to controlled fury. The thing that had frightened her was the elevator. The moment before the garage. The moment when the lights had not yet gone out, and she had been standing there with Hale at her shoulder and her phone in her clutch, and Logan's text unread and everything still technically fine. That moment had been the frightening one, because in it, she had seen clearly how thoroughly she had managed herself into a position where the thing she feared most had become inevitable. She had prioritized her professional image over her husband's warnings. She had done it knowingly, or mostly knowingly, wrapping it in the language of strategy and evidence and not wanting to be managed by fear. And what she understood now, sitting with the distance of weeks, was that she had not been wrong to want those things, to want evidence, to resist being managed by fear. Those were not bad instincts. What had been wrong was the specific way she had deployed them, which had been, underneath all the strategic language, about not wanting to feel frightened, about wanting the world to stay inside the version she had constructed, where she was in control, and the threats were the kind she knew how to handle. Logan had shown her a different kind of threat. She had not known how to handle it, so she had put the phone away. She had put the phone away, and then she had been in an elevator, and then the lights had gone out. She thought about this sometimes at 11 p.m. while Logan read and the city went quiet. Not with ongoing guilt. Guilt was a fire that needed feeding, and she had stopped feeding it. But with the specific kind of attention she gave to things she wanted to understand, because understanding them was the only way to not repeat them. She thought, I was wrong, and I knew I was wrong, and I did it anyway because it was easier. And then she thought, I know that about myself now. What am I going to do with it? The answer, like most answers, was ongoing. It was not a resolution, but a direction. What? Lily's 8th birthday fell on a Saturday in November, which was convenient in the way that birthdays on Saturdays are always convenient when you have a child who has opinions about cake and also opinions about the precise number of people who should be present for the eating of the cake. Lily had decided that the guest list should be her 3 closest friends from school, Rosa and Diego Garcia, Marcus, and Vanessa's work friends, but not too many. Vanessa had interpreted not too many as 3, which Lily confirmed was correct. Logan had made the cake himself, which was a decision he had arrived at because Lily had specifically requested chocolate with chocolate frosting, and when he had mentioned possibly ordering from a bakery, she had looked at him with the expression of a person who believes that effort is the point, not outcome. So he had made the cake. It was imperfect in the specific ways that homemade cakes are imperfect. Slightly uneven layers, frosting that had been applied with more enthusiasm than technique, and Lily had looked at it when he set it on the counter and said, "Good." That was the highest available praise from his daughter, and he knew it. The afternoon was ordinary in the way he had come to value ordinary. Loud, occasionally chaotic, punctuated by the specific energy of 3 8-year-olds and 2 adults trying to manage a living room that had been configured for a party and was now being reconfigured in real time by people with different ideas about space. Rosa and Diego sat at the kitchen table with coffee and watched everything with the benevolent calm of people who had raised 3 children and been through enough birthday parties to understand that the mess was the event. Marcus arrived with a gift wrapped impeccably and stood near the kitchen doorway for most of the afternoon with the quality of a man who is slightly outside his natural habitat but is genuinely glad to be present. He and Logan had a conversation in the kitchen while the children were in the living room that was brief and mostly about the Arcturus integration and a personnel question on the strategy team, which was the kind of conversation that would have seemed strange at a child's birthday party 6 months ago and now seemed entirely natural, because the separation between Logan's life and Vanessa's professional world had dissolved in October in a parking garage and neither of them had tried to rebuild it. Vanessa sat on the living room floor with Lily and Lily's friends for most of the afternoon, which was not something Logan had expected and which told him something he filed without comment. She was not a person who typically sat on floors. She was a person who managed rooms from standing positions and moved through spaces with intention. Sitting on the floor of a living room surrounded by 8-year-olds was not inside the behavioral vocabulary he had assembled for her over 2 years. But she was down there, and she was asking questions about the card game Lily's friends were playing, and she was losing it with visible competitiveness that made Lily laugh. And she looked, in that hour, like someone who had found a way into a room she had been standing outside of for a long time. He watched from the kitchen doorway for a moment. Then he went back to slicing the cake and said nothing, because some things are better honored by silence than by the words you choose to describe them. When it was time for the candles, Lily stood at the table and looked at the 8 flames, and then looked at Logan, and then at Vanessa. "Can I make 2 wishes?" she said. "Technically, there's only one," Logan said. "That's a rule?" "It's a tradition." She considered this. "What if I make one big wish that's actually 2 things?" "I think that's called a loophole," Vanessa said. "Yes," Lily said with satisfaction. "It is." She blew out the candles. Logan did not ask her what she had wished for, because you don't, and also because he thought he already knew, and the knowing of it was enough. The trial, when it came, was in March. Logan testified for 2 days. He sat in the witness stand in a federal courtroom and answered questions about the 2018 mission and the events of October with the same quality he brought to everything that required steadiness, present, direct, without performance. He did not enjoy it. He had not expected to enjoy it. He had expected it to cost him something, and it did. 2 days of having his history taken out of the context he had chosen for it, and laid on a table for strangers to examine, which was a specific kind of exposure that no amount of preparation fully addresses. Vanessa was in the courtroom for both days. She had cleared her schedule, which for Vanessa Holloway meant canceling or rescheduling things that people had put on her calendar months in advance, which was not a small thing and which she did without being asked. She sat in the gallery and she watched him. She did not take notes. She did not check her phone. She just sat there, which was her way of telling him something she had not found words for yet. That she was there, and she was not ashamed, and whatever was asked of them by this process, they would pay together. He saw her there when he sat down the first morning, and it changed something in the quality of the next 2 days in a way he couldn't have predicted and didn't try to analyze. It just changed it. That was sufficient. Marchetti was convicted on 11 of 14 counts in March. Hale received a reduced sentence for his cooperation. 3 other members of the operation received sentences ranging from 4 to 9 years. The man Logan knew as Guerra, who had been at the gala and in the warehouse, received 7. When the verdicts came in, Logan was at the 39th floor office, and Vanessa was in a meeting on 42, and Lily was at school learning fractions that were, by her own assessment, still stupid. The world did not stop. The city did not pause. The particular ongoing machinery of ordinary life continued without acknowledging the thing that had just resolved. Logan read the verdict notification on his phone. He sat with it for a moment, then he texted Vanessa a single word. Done. She replied 40 seconds later. Come upstairs. I have coffee. He put his phone in his pocket and took the elevator to 42. There is something about the way the people you love age inside a fixed space, inside an apartment, inside a city block, inside the specific geography of a life you've built together. It is not dramatic. It is not the kind of thing you notice until you step back far enough to see it whole. And even then, it is not the grand arc of a story, but a series of small, specific changes that accumulate into something that looks, from a sufficient distance, like a life. Logan Pierce was 39 in the spring. He was not the person he had been at 29, which had been a man carrying things he did not know how to put down. He was not the person he had been at 34, which had been a man building a new structure over a grief that was too recent and too large to build over safely. He was something closer to himself now, a version that had stopped requiring so much maintenance to sustain, that had found, in the specific ordinariness of a Tuesday morning or a Saturday afternoon, a kind of peace that was not absence of difficulty, but coexistence with it. He still woke early. He still moved through any environment, a restaurant, a parking garage, an office building, with the automatic assessment of someone who has spent too many years making threat maps to stop doing it entirely. He still had nights when something from the teams came back at him in that specific unpredictable way that old things do, arriving without warning in a dream or a moment of quiet. He had learned not to expect that to stop. But he also had a daughter who was going to turn 9 in November, and who had recently decided that fractions were, on reflection, acceptable, and that decimals were the actual enemy. He had a wife who would, in high-stakes meetings, use the precise phrasing he had used once about situational geometry, which she had absorbed without telling him, and deployed without acknowledgement, which was one of the specific ways she showed him that she had been listening even when she appeared to be moving on. He had a job that used what he was actually good at and did not ask him to be anything else. He had a second-floor office on the 39th floor of a building that knew him now, not as the quiet man with the mop, but as the man Vanessa Pierce had married, which were two versions of the same person and which had finally, in the course of one terrible October, been allowed to occupy the same space. He had, in other words, a life. An actual one, not a cover and not a mission. A life. This sounds simpler than it was. Vanessa Pierce. She had changed nothing legally, she had not taken the name, but she had stopped being precise about the distinction in context that didn't require precision, turned 31 in April. She did not make large events of her birthdays, which was a preference Logan had noted and accommodated from the beginning. A small dinner, specific food, no surprises. The dinner was on a Friday. Lily had made a card with a drawing on the front that depicted what appeared to be 3 people standing in front of a building, rendered in marker with the proportional creativity of a child who draws people based on their relative importance rather than their relative size. Vanessa was the largest figure. Logan was next to her. Lily was on Vanessa's other side holding both their hands. Vanessa had looked at the card for a moment before she said anything. Then she said, "Why am I bigger?" "Because it's your birthday," Lily said. "You're the main person." "Ah," Vanessa said. "Also, you wear heels," Lily said. "That helps." Logan saw Vanessa's face do a thing it did rarely. A brief, unguarded moment where something that was not composed surfaced and was visible before she could manage it back. Not distress, something softer than distress. Something that looked, to someone who knew how to read her, like the specific expression of a person receiving something they had been waiting for longer than they knew. She put the card on the kitchen counter where she could see it. It stayed there for weeks. Logan watched it become part of the landscape of the kitchen, propped against the backsplash next to the coffee maker, slightly curling at the edges as the days passed. He did not mention it. She did not explain it. It was simply there, the way significant things settle into the ordinary texture of a home, not as monuments, but as evidence. Evidence that this had happened and was happening and would continue to happen. You could build a life out of evidence like that, if you were willing to let the things you'd been protecting become the things you'd been building toward instead. Logan had spent a long time protecting. He was learning slowly and imperfectly, and with occasional backsliding into old habits, to build. Vanessa had spent a long time building in the wrong direction, outward and upward toward things that could be measured, and was learning, with the characteristic intensity she brought to anything she decided deserved attention, to build inward, toward the smaller, harder things, toward the card on the counter, toward the floor at Lily's birthday party, toward the 2 words she had said in a conference room to 14 board members that had cost her something real and freed her from something heavier. Lily was 8 and did not know she was learning anything. She was simply living, which is the most efficient form of learning and the one that costs the least and retains the most. On a Saturday in May, a warm one, the city finally releasing the last of a long winter, Logan took Lily to the park and they sat on the grass for 2 hours doing nothing in particular, which was the kind of afternoon that looks unimportant from the outside and which Lily would, Logan suspected, remember in some form for the rest of her life. The way children encode certain sensory moments without knowing they're encoding anything. Vanessa joined them at noon with coffee and her shoes already off before she reached the grass, which Logan noted because she had, a year ago, never taken her shoes off in public spaces. She sat next to him and Lily arranged herself between them with a book she was not actively reading, holding it open as cover for a nap that arrived within 15 minutes. Vanessa leaned back on her hands and looked at the trees. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what I would have done differently." "With the board?" he said. "The deal?" "With you," she said. "With us. The first 2 years." He waited. "I think I would have told the board earlier," she said. "Not immediately, but earlier, before I had to." She paused. "Not because it would have been easier. I think it would have been harder, but it would have been right." "Maybe," he said. "I know it would have." She was not asking him to agree. She was thinking out loud, which was something she had started doing more in the past 6 months, letting the incomplete thoughts have air. "I was so convinced I had to present a finished version of everything, that nothing could be visible until it was resolved." She looked at Lily, sleeping in the grass. "She does that too," she said. "The resolving before sharing thing." "She does," he agreed. "I wonder where she got it." Vanessa looked at him sideways. "I walked into that." "You did?" She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Do you think people change? Actually change, not just adapt?" He thought about it honestly. He was someone who had changed, though he would not have described himself that way at the time he was doing it. The man who had come home from the last deployment and sat in a hospital room for 48 hours, and then driven to New Jersey to figure out how to raise a 14-month-old, had not felt like someone in a process of change. He had felt like someone in a process of survival, which is the version of change that happens when you don't have the luxury of choosing it. "I think people change the way water changes stone," he said, slowly. "And then you look one day and the shape is different and you can't point to when it happened." She considered that. "That's optimistic for you." "I have my moments." Lily made a small sound in her sleep and turned, and Vanessa moved automatically to adjust the shadow of the tree over her, which was a thing she did without thinking. And Logan watched her do it and thought about the word change and what it really meant when you applied it to someone you loved. It didn't mean they became a different person. It meant that the person they already were found more room to exist. That the parts of them that had been compressed by fear or habit or circumstance expanded into space that got made available by circumstance or choice, or the particular chemistry of being known by someone who didn't need you to be anything other than what you were. Vanessa had always been the woman who moved automatically to keep the shadow over a sleeping child. That woman had just needed room. Logan had always been the man who noticed what everyone else walked past. He had spent 8 years making himself invisible around that. He didn't need to anymore. Lily slept between them in the May afternoon, holding her unread book, growing the way children grow, continuously, invisibly, in all directions at once. And around her, the 2 people who had decided to be her family sat in the grass and were, without making much of it, exactly where they were supposed to be. Not because the story had gone smoothly. It had not. Not because they had gotten everything right. They had not. And they both knew it. And they had stopped pretending otherwise, which was the closest thing to wisdom that most people manage. But because they had told the truth when it mattered, even when it was late, because they had chosen, repeatedly and imperfectly, to move toward each other instead of away. Because a warehouse in Red Hook, and a board meeting, and a kitchen table at 2 in the morning, and a birthday card propped against a backsplash had accumulated, in the way that small true things accumulate, into something that held. The park was loud with the ordinary Saturday sounds of a city in spring: dogs, children, someone playing music from a phone that was too far away to identify. The sun moved in the way that May sun moves, generous and temporary. Logan looked at his family in the grass. He had spent 12 years being trained to see everything that could go wrong. He had spent 8 years after that learning to see what was still standing. He was 39 years old, and he was sitting in a park, and his daughter was asleep on his jacket, and his wife was watching the trees. And what he understood, not for the first time but more fully than before, in the way that real understanding arrives gradually rather than all at once, was that the life worth protecting had never been an abstraction. It was always this specific, always this ordinary, always this exact. He had been protecting it for years without knowing he was building it at the same time. That was the thing nobody told you about the life you were trying to save, that saving it and living it were not sequential. They happened simultaneously, in the same moments, through the same choices, by the same people who were imperfect and afraid and doing it anyway. The shadow moved. Vanessa reached over without looking and found his hand. He held it. The afternoon continued.